9-year-old girl does not simply walk into the darkness of a storm-lashed night without a destination. Asha Degree was a child of routine, a quiet, studious soul whose life was anchored by the steady, predictable rhythm of her family home in Shelby, North Carolina. Yet on a freezing February morning in the year 2000, the sanctuary of that home was shattered by an impossible absence. Her bed was empty, her belongings were scattered. And the front door stood as a silent, mocking testament to a departure that defied all logic. What could possibly compel a young girl to step out into the driving rain, leaving behind the safety of her parents and the warmth of her room? The investigation that followed would reveal not a trail of breadcrumbs, but a labyrinth of contradictions that have haunted investigators for over 2 decades. 2 truck drivers saw a small, lone figure walking along the dark, rain-slicked highway at 3 in the morning. When one driver turned his vehicle around to check on the child, she didn't call for help or wait for the light of his headlights. Instead, she bolted into the dense black woods bordering the road, vanishing into the thicket like a ghost. There was no one else on that desolate stretch of highway. Why would a 9-year-old girl run from a stranger into the freezing, absolute void? This was not a flight of fancy, but a calculated disappearance. The police discovered that Asha had packed a backpack, filling it with her favorite clothes, a few cherished toys, and enough essentials to suggest she had planned this journey with a chilling, singular focus. But where was she going, and more importantly, who or what was calling her into the void? The local community was paralyzed by the realization that the danger was not just outside, but perhaps woven into the very fabric of their quiet, suburban existence. As the search expanded, the evidence became increasingly bizarre, suggesting that Asha's final steps were guided by an unseen hand. Every lid that surfaced seemed to evaporate under scrutiny, leaving behind only the cold, biting wind of the North Carolina winter and the shattering silence of a house that would never be the same again. We are left to wonder if she was running toward a dream, or if she was being lured into a trap that had been set long before she ever opened that front door. To understand the void left behind by Asha Degree, one must first understand the foundation of her existence in the quiet, tight-knit enclave of Shelby, North Carolina. Asha was not a child prone to rebellion. She was a studious, reserved 10-year-old, a pillar of her local church, and a girl who found comfort in the predictable rhythm of a loving household. Her parents, Harold and Aquila, had built a life defined by stability and faith, shielding their children from the harsh edges of the outside world. Yet even in the most secure homes, there are shadows that go unnoticed until the light is suddenly extinguished. The community of Shelby was the kind of place where doors remained unlocked and neighbors knew each other by name, a setting that makes the impossibility of her departure feel all the more jarring. It wasn't just a disappearance. It was a rupture in the fabric of a small-town reality that refused to acknowledge the existence of predators. Her room was a sanctuary of childhood innocence, filled with books and the soft remnants of a typical life. But as the investigators began to peel back the layers of her daily routine, they discovered something that didn't belong. Tucked away, hidden from the gaze of her parents, was a collection of items that suggested a secret life. A backpack, a photograph, and a strange handwritten note that defied all logic. Who was she waiting for in the dead of night, and what were they planning to do? This discovery shattered the narrative of the perfect, happy child. If Asha was truly content, why would she harbor such clandestine artifacts? The investigators combed through her school records and interviewed her peers, searching for a catalyst for such a bizarre decision. They found nothing but a bright student who excelled in basketball and cherished her family. Yet, the dichotomy between the girl they knew and the girl who walked out into the freezing February rain remains the central paradox of this case. Was she lured by a promise of adventure, or was she running from a threat that no one else could see? The town of Shelby, once defined by its tranquility, became a landscape of suspicion, where every passing car and every locked door held the potential for a dark, hidden truth. We are forced to ask ourselves, how much can we ever truly know about the people sleeping just down the hall? The more we learn about her quiet life, the more the silence of her absence screams for an answer that refuses to surface. Asha Degree did not simply walk away from her existence. She stepped into a void that swallowed her whole. On that frigid February morning in 2000, the silence of Shelby, North Carolina was absolute, yet it masked a mystery that would defy every law of logic. The investigation began with the frantic, disbelieving eyes of her parents, who discovered her bedroom empty, her bed undisturbed, and her life suddenly absent. Local authorities arrived to find a scene that felt staged by a ghost. There were no signs of a forced entry, no struggle, and no indication that a 9-year-old girl had orchestrated a midnight departure. The air in the house was thick with a heavy, suffocating dread as investigators combed through the home, looking for a trail that simply did not exist. 2 motorists reported seeing a young girl walking along the dark, rain-slicked highway at 4 in the morning. When one driver turned his vehicle around to check on the child, she vanished into the dense black tree line. He didn't just see a girl, he saw a shadow that refused to be caught. By the time police arrived to scour the shoulder of the road, the only thing left behind was the biting cold and the terrifying realization that she was no longer alone in the dark. This sighting was not merely a light, it was a paradox. Why would a child known for her shyness and fear of the dark willingly wander into the path of speeding trucks on a desolate stretch of highway? The police interviewed the witnesses repeatedly, their testimonies remaining hauntingly consistent, yet the physical evidence remained non-existent. As the hours stretched into days, the search expanded into a massive, grid-like operation. Helicopters circled the canopy, their blades churning the damp winter air, while canine units tracked a scent that seemed to evaporate into the mist. The investigators were chasing a phantom, a trail that led to nowhere, leaving them to wonder if they were looking for a runaway or if they were tracking the movements of a silent, invisible predator. Every lead turned into a dead end, and every theory collapsed under the weight of the impossible. The community was left to grapple with the agonizing question of what could have compelled a girl to leave her sanctuary in the dead of night. Was she lured by a promise, or was she running from a secret that she kept buried deep within her heart? The investigation was no longer about finding a child. It was about understanding why the world had suddenly decided to hide her from view. Asha Degree did not simply vanish into the night. She left behind a trail of enigmatic breadcrumbs that defy every logical explanation. When investigators finally recovered her belongings, the backpack wrapped in plastic bags and buried deep within a construction site, they expected to find a clear narrative of a runaway. Instead, they discovered a labyrinth of contradictions. Inside that bag, nestled among her clothes and personal effects, were items that did not belong to a 9-year-old girl. A photograph of a young girl she did not know, a small plastic purse, and a hair ribbon. These objects, seemingly innocuous, transformed the investigation from a search for a missing child into a haunting puzzle of potential abduction. Experts who analyzed the contents noted the chilling precision with which the items were packed, suggesting a level of forethought that seemed impossible for a child in the middle of storm. The contents of the bag were not merely random belongings, but a collection of items that felt curated by someone else. Among the clothes, investigators found a photograph of a mystery girl, a face that Asha's family did not recognize. Was this a clue left by a predator or a desperate memento from a secret friend? As the forensic teams sifted through the damp fabric, they realized the most terrifying truth of all. The backpack had been buried with the intent that it would never be found. The note found in her room remains the most volatile piece of evidence. It was a fragment of paper that spoke of a life far more complicated than the one her parents knew. Why would a child write about the midnight walk in such a cryptic, deliberate fashion? Investigators spent years dissecting the handwriting, the ink, and the very structure of the sentences, searching for a hidden code. Some believe the note was a script written under duress, while others argue it was a manifestation of a secret world Asha had constructed to escape her reality. Every time the police thought they had a lead, the evidence seemed to evaporate like mist. The plastic bags protecting the backpack suggested someone had taken great care to preserve the items, shielding them from the harsh elements of the North Carolina woods. This was not the work of a child who had simply wandered off. This was the work of someone who understood the fragility of evidence. The deeper the detectives dug, the more the silence grew. Each clue only served to widen the gap between what we know and what actually happened on that dark, rain-slicked highway. We are left staring at a void, wondering if the answers were buried right beneath our feet all along, hidden in the very items meant to tell us who she was. The shadows surrounding the disappearance of Asha Degree do not merely hide the truth, they actively distort it. As investigators combed through the damp, unforgiving landscape of North Carolina, the absence of physical evidence became a haunting presence of its own. Could a child truly vanish into the thin, freezing air of a February night without leaving a single trace of a struggle, a scent for the tracking dogs, or a witness to her departure? Theories began to splinter, moving from the possibility of a random predator lurking on the highway to the far more unsettling notion that the danger was closer to home. Every acquaintance, every passing motorist, and every neighbor was scrutinized under a microscope of suspicion, yet the silence remained absolute. Was she lured by a promise or driven by a secret that no one else in her family had managed to uncover? The investigation hit a wall of contradictions where every lead felt like a ghost, dissipating the moment it was touched. Deep within the files of the cold case unit, a single, overlooked detail began to surface. A witness reported seeing a car parked near the bridge, its lights extinguished in the dead of night. When the investigators finally tracked down the owner of that vehicle, they didn't find a suspect, but a chilling realization that someone had been watching the house for weeks. The trail didn't just go cold. It led directly into a trap that no one saw coming until it was far too late. This revelation forced a total reevaluation of the timeline, turning the search for a missing girl into a hunt for a phantom. If an abductor had been tracking her, how could they have navigated the darkness with such surgical precision? The psychological toll on the community was immense, as trust dissolved into a landscape of mutual suspicion. People began to look at their neighbors with fear, wondering if the person they greeted every morning was the same one who had watched a young girl walk into the abyss. The evidence, or lack thereof, suggests a level of planning that defies the logic of an impulsive crime. It implies a predator who understood the rhythm of the household, the layout of the roads, and the exact moment when the world would be looking the other way. As we peel back the layers of this mystery, we must confront the possibility that the answer has been hiding in plain sight, obscured by the very darkness that swallowed her whole. The investigation into Asha Degree's departure didn't just stall, it fractured into 1,000 disparate theories that haunt the halls of the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office to this day. When the FBI stepped in, they brought the full weight of federal surveillance and behavioral analysis, yet the trail remained as cold as the February morning she vanished. For years, the case existed in a vacuum of silence, but as the digital age dawned, the mystery found a new, insatiable life online. Social media platforms transformed the search from a local tragedy into a global, collective obsession. Thousands of armchair investigators began dissecting every grainy photograph and every rumored sighting, turning the case into a digital labyrinth where truth is often indistinguishable from conjecture. Technological advancements have recently allowed investigators to re-examine the evidence with a precision that was impossible in the year 2000. They are scrubbing digital archives and retesting items recovered from the woods, looking for microscopic traces of DNA that could finally name a suspect. Yet with every new lead that emerges from the deep, dark corners of the internet, the core mystery only deepens. Investigators are now tracking a chilling, previously unknown link between the evidence and a vehicle that was never supposed to be on that road. Forensic science has evolved from a blunt instrument into a surgical tool capable of extracting secrets from the very fabric of time. The backpack discovered buried in the soil was once a dead end, but modern chemical analysis is now probing the layers of silt and fiber for chemical signatures that might reveal where it had been hidden before it was discarded. It is a race against the decay of evidence, a desperate attempt to bridge the gap between a terrified 9-year-old girl walking into the night and the cold, hard reality of what transpired on that highway. Yet even as the technology sharpens, the human element remains a shroud. Why would a child, described by all who knew her as cautious and shy, leave the sanctuary of her home during a thunderstorm? The FBI's behavioral experts have spent decades debating the why, oscillating between the theory of a planned runaway and the darker, more sinister possibility of a predator who manipulated her trust. Every time a new tip arrives, a social media post from a stranger claiming to have seen a girl matching her description, or a new witness surfacing decades late, the investigators are forced to revisit the same haunting crossroads. The digital archives are now a graveyard of half-truths and dead ends, yet the community refuses to let the case go. They are looking for the midnight walker in the metadata of old photos, hoping that an algorithm will spot what the human eye missed in the dim glow of a dashboard light. We are left with a paradox. We have more information than ever before, more ways to process it, and more eyes watching the evidence. Yet the distance between us and the truth feels wider than it did on that first, devastating morning. What if the answer isn't hidden in the woods, but in the one place we haven't dared to look yet? The silence in the Degree household did not just linger. It became a living, breathing entity that occupied every corner of their home. For Harold and Aquila, the passage of time was not marked by calendars, but by the relentless, grinding weight of an absence that refused to heal. Every morning the sun would crest over the horizon, illuminating the empty bedroom that remained a frozen tomb of childhood innocence, preserved in the amber of 2000. They kept her clothes, her books, and her dreams tucked away, waiting for a key that would never turn in the lock. The community of Shelby, once a place of quiet familiarity, transformed into a landscape of suspicion, where every neighbor's glance felt like an unspoken accusation or a veiled secret. Years bled into decades, and the search for Asha shifted from a frantic sprint into a grueling, lifelong marathon of grief. The family clung to the hope that she was still out there, existing in a world they could not reach. Yet every time the investigators revisited the evidence, the path grew colder and more twisted. They found her backpack buried in the dark, damp earth, wrapped in plastic like a macabre offering. If she had truly walked away into the night, then who was waiting for her in the shadows? There is a profound, soul-crushing agony in not knowing whether your child is a memory or a ghost. The parents endured the scrutiny of a public that demanded answers they did not possess, their private pain laid bare under the harsh spotlight of national media. They became the architects of their own endurance, organizing vigils that felt more like desperate prayers sent into the void. The investigators, too, were haunted by the failure of the early days. The missteps that allowed a trail to go cold before the sun had even fully risen on that fateful Tuesday. What if the person who took her was someone they trusted, someone who knew exactly when the porch light would flicker out? The psychological toll on the community was equally suffocating, as parents began to lock doors that had remained open for generations, the innocence of the town shattered by a single, inexplicable disappearance. Every time a new lead emerged, a sighting in a distant state, a scrap of evidence uncovered in the woods, the cycle of hope and devastation would begin anew. It is a cruel paradox to be trapped in a state of perpetual mourning for someone who might still be breathing somewhere just out of reach. As the years stretch onward, the question remains, is the truth buried under the soil of North Carolina, or is it hidden behind the eyes of someone who walks among us, keeping the secret of that midnight walk locked away in the darkness of their own mind? The case of Asha Degree remains a gaping wound in the heart of North Carolina, a mystery that defies the natural order of logic and closure. We are left with a landscape of shattered possibilities, where a 9-year-old girl walked into the darkness of a storm and simply ceased to exist in the world we understand. Investigators have combed through thousands of tips, analyzed DNA evidence that once seemed promising, and peered into the lives of those who might have held the key, yet the truth remains locked behind an impenetrable veil. Every time a new lead emerges, it feels like we are reaching for a ghost, only to have our hands pass through the cold, empty air of the unknown. The discovery of her belongings, buried and wrapped in plastic, suggests a level of premeditation that haunts the families of the missing, implying that someone somewhere knows exactly what happened on that stretch of Highway 18. Investigators finally unearthed the final piece of the puzzle, a small, weathered item buried deep beneath the soil. It wasn't just a trinket, it was a chilling signature left behind by a shadow who had been watching for years. As the forensic team brushed away the damp earth, the realization hit them like a physical blow. The item didn't belong to Asha, and it didn't belong to the search party. It belonged to someone who was still out there, waiting for the next midnight walk to begin. We must ask ourselves if we have been looking at the wrong reflection all along, or if the answer has been hiding in plain sight, obscured by our own desperate need for a simple explanation. The silence from those who might have seen something that night is the loudest testimony of all. As the years stretch into decades, the hope for Asha's return shifts from a frantic search into a quiet, enduring vigil. We are not just looking for a girl. We are looking for the integrity of our own sense of safety. Why would a child leave her home in the middle of the night, and who or what was waiting at the end of that frozen road? The questions are not merely academic, they are the anchors that keep us tethered to a nightmare that refuses to end. Perhaps the truth is not buried in the ground, but in the collective memory of a community that has never truly stopped grieving. We must continue to share her story, to keep her face in the light, because as long as we remember, she is never truly lost.